Well, hello, brave samurai warriors. It's Old Gamer Joe here with another review today here at I Dream of Indie. We're looking at Samurai Bringer on Steam. Gonna take you back to 1998 for just a moment here. Young Gamer Joe purchased a game called Brave Fencer Musashi on his PlayStation, and he really purchased it because he wanted the Final Fantasy VIII demo. But to my surprise, it was actually a really fun little action role-playing title, and it's the game that I couldn't get out of my head while I was playing through Samurai Bringer. That game, of course, was not a roguelite experience. However, Samurai Bringer very much is. Just because there isn't much story here, I don't want to spoil it for you, but I'll give you the basics. You are sent to an underworld of sorts where you are on a quest to battle an evil dragon known as Yamata-no-Orochi. Again, sorry for butchering that. And that's pretty much all there is to it. There's really nothing exceptional about the writing whatsoever. You won't get much in the way of dialogue throughout the game, but I suppose the initial setup serves its purpose. When you do interact with certain non-playable characters, some of which have shops and inns for example, you may stumble across a few grammatical errors here or there due to a weak English translation, but in the end, Samurai Bringer is focused mainly on its roguelike gameplay loop and deep customizable combat options. Your goal in the game is generally going to be the same thing over and over again. You're going to be traveling through various light vortex portal thingies, taking down wave after wave of enemy, and ultimately you'll be encountering a very powerful boss that's going to beat the hell out of you time and time again, if your gameplay is anything like mine was. Yes, this game is not for the faint of heart. The actual process of getting to a boss isn't so much the problem, but you are in for a really massive difficulty spike when you do get to those bosses, so be prepared for that. Your controls are extremely customizable in Samurai Bringer, and ultimately you're going to be the one that decides which abilities are attached to which button. I was thankful for this, as initially my light attack was attached to the A button on my Xbox controller, and my heavy attack was on Y. This made dodging and jumping a bit awkward, as it's not a control scheme I'm accustomed to, but thankfully you can change things around, which is perhaps the most interesting aspect of Samurai Bringer. As you slice down wave after wave of enemy, you'll be collecting a wide variety of combat scrolls. Now here's where things get a bit more complicated. You aren't only equipping various types of armor here, you're deciding what kind of skills you'll be using in combat as well. Each button has a certain amount of slots available, so for example, if you have a scroll for a thrust, a slash, or an upward strike, pressing the A button 3 times will execute those 3 attacks in succession. Another button slot may be utilized for sidestepping or jumping, and you'll decide where everything goes and how it flows. Hell, you're even able to stack the same scroll on top of another one to make it more effective, or add some lightning or flame effects to a weapon. It's a staggering amount of combinations that you can potentially have for your character, and it did honestly overwhelm me just a bit. Still, once you start to get an understanding of things, it's really neat to experiment with, even though it can be time consuming and requires patience along with some trial and error. As you roam about these maps defeating generals, you'll be able to collect some of their armor off of their fallen bodies, and you'll also find keys from time to time that can unlock chests, which also have armor and weapons. Even these offer flexibility in where you slot them on your character and what kinds of status effects they'll have. They might lessen the effects of poison or take less damage from flames. Again, it's just an unbelievable amount of options that you have here, so this is not the most accessible title, and it's certainly not for very casual players. The combat itself will almost feel like Dynasty Warriors at times, depending on how you've equipped your character. You can just mow down enemies quite easily, and that can be a lot of fun. Some of the bigger generals, though, will block every single attack you throw at them, so it's important to find the right combination of weapons. So you're probably wondering, of course I'm going to inevitably die in this game. What happens to me, Joe, when that occurs? Well, you're going to lose all of the arms that you've collected, but at the least you'll be able to keep your combat scrolls. So this is a game that isn't quite as punishing as some roguelites, but trust me, it's punishing enough. As you battle through these procedurally generated levels, you'll slowly be unlocking new samurai loadouts as well that you can equip in an overworld area of sorts, and this was honestly helpful, as again, this game can feel overwhelming, but it was extremely satisfying when I did unlock a new samurai suit. I particularly liked getting the ninja class. It was a lot of fun to mess around with. I should also note that outside of your HP meter, which you'll obviously need to keep an eye on, you have an SP meter, and the more of your abilities you use, the quicker that will drain. If it runs out, you'll be dizzy for a while, and that can leave you open to attack. But at any rate, there were, I believe, 142 2 different samurai-type armors to collect. It took me 4 hours to get 9 of them. Unbelievable. So here's the me problem section of this review, so take it with a grain of salt. The grind, the fatigue of battling endless wave of enemy after endless wave of enemies, only to be toppled by a cheap, all-powerful boss, did eventually wear me down. The game is made all the more difficult by a timer, which as the days pass, enemies will become more challenging. Thankfully, I didn't run into any sort of definitive game over type time mechanic. I was thankful for that, but weren't things challenging enough? As the days go by, you gotta make the game harder too. But still, even with that timer, I didn't find the actual process of getting to the boss to really be the hard part about this game. It was just more of those boss areas. There's some giant general you fight before the boss even shows up, and it's just kind of annoying after a while. Thankfully, you can actually exit these boss encounters altogether if you're doing poorly, which you probably will, and come back to them later through a portal. There is a pretty good variety of different shops that you'll come across, everything from special scrolls that can be used for other combinations, making things even more complex and deep. And really, I have great respect for the ambition here. I couldn't help but admire the love and care that went into this combat engine, even if the gameplay loop ultimately wasn't for me. I love the charming visuals, voxel style, with almost a grainy looking filter that gives off the vibe of a kind of a 3DS title. You can crank up the shadows and the action is smooth at 120 frames per second. Even though you'll see a lot of the same enemies and bosses, they do look jaw-dropping, and the lighting effects really did impress me. Sparks fly off of enemies as you slash into them, trees gently blow in the breeze, mountains have layers to them. It all looks wonderful, accompanied by a chiptune NES-style soundtrack that has some nice melodies, but others are a bit high-pitched and almost grating on the ears. This isn't helped by a poor initial sound mix where the sound effects and music felt at battle with one another. I eventually turned the sound effects down to 50%, but still, despite some promising compositions, the game could have used an overall better mix and master. The isometric camera works well here, and you're able to spin it freely, or even opt for a top-down view, so overall, the visuals were one of my favorite parts of Samurai Bringer despite my mixed feelings on the audio. In the end, Samurai Bringer is a deep, robust gameplay experience that will almost certainly appeal to roguelite fans who love the idea of being able to customize different combat styles. You can't help but respect the ambition, the care that went into all of the different systems. While the story merely serves the purpose, it's a game that stands out a bit in an overcrowded genre, and that's hard not to appreciate. Even though the gameplay loop eventually broke me and I ended up a bit bored and tired of it all, fans of the genre should find a lot to like about Samurai Bringer. Thank you so much for supporting clickbait-free independent content here at I Dream of Indie. We can't make it without you, and we can't survive without our brave indie warriors and legends that make it possible. Thank you so much to indie warriors Bill T, Christian Cruz, Kevalo, Adriana Amato, CJR, PSC, Julian Colbus, Jesse, Raylin, Marky Mint, Dave Hart, Peekaboo, Lex Noyle, Carmine Red, and King of the Hatch, and the brave indie legends Jen Rose, Larkison, Mitchell Hall, Peach, Skeptism, Seacoil, Nathan Moore, Chris Jackson, Mr. W, Blue Francis 14, The Beefarinis, and Business Cody. Thank you so much for all that you do for independent developers, for publishers, and for I Dream of Indie. Help us bring a voice to the voiceless ones in gaming by heading down to the description box below.